The world is experiencing unprecedented demographic change with important economic implications. Population size, growth, age structure, and geographic distribution influence economies because of systematic features of the human life cycle. Labor productivity is highest in the middle years of life, and, hence, an increase in the population at the Middle Ages contributes directly to national production. Dependent populations at young and old ages consume much more than they produce through their labor, with implications for living standards and intergenerational transfers. The global economic impact of the population reflects national variation in the life cycle interacting with national differences in demographic change and productivity. Detailed estimates of the life cycle across 186 countries, based on national transfer accounts, (NTA), lead to 6 important observations about the likely effects of population on the global economy. Population growth should lead to a continuation of global GDP growth, but the impact may be modest because growth in the working-age population is concentrated in countries with low labor productivity. The shape of the economic life cycle, with high consumption and low labor supply at older ages, will heighten the global economic costs of population aging. Current spending patterns suggest that the high costs will be absorbed by prime-age adults rather than children or the elderly. Many pressing environmental, health, and economic issues, some of which are considered here, are global in nature and inextricably linked to population. Understanding the connections is essential. Life cycle fundamentals. The life cycle is key to understanding the economic impact of the population and the methods employed in the analysis presented here. See supporting information, SI, for more details. Children and the elderly have material needs that are satisfied by consumption, but their production of goods and services through their labor is insufficient to meet those needs. Working-age adults produce enough to meet their own needs and, in addition, to support children and the elderly and to save for the future. Broad features of the life cycle are common to all economies, but important details vary. Per capita differences by age interact with population to influence aggregate trends in macroeconomic outcomes. 6 key findings. In the analysis presented here, we emphasize the most direct channels by which population change impacts the economy and set aside more indirect channels that are less straightforward. We touch lightly on capital but not on human capital. We emphasize labor but not the changing role of women in the workplace. We discuss the impact of population aging on the economic security of seniors but do not explicitly model how policy reform might respond to demographic change and influence economic outcomes. Important research on these and other topics is typically carried out at the national level, but with implications for global outcomes. The research presented here provides a baseline for considering global change and identifying important ways the population may contribute to and interfere with economic progress. The era of population-driven economic growth is ending. The demographic transition initially led to global population growth that reached unprecedented levels in the early 1970s. As stated in the broadest possible terms, rapid population growth contributed to rapid growth in the number of workers and rapid growth in the number of workers contributed to rapid growth in GDP. As the demographic transition comes to an end, the population is expected to grow more slowly and, after many decades, approach a peak that is substantially greater than is currently the case. Unraveling the impact of global population growth on global economic growth is difficult for many reasons, but here we emphasize 3 aspects of demographic and economic heterogeneity. The first is population and age structure, the second is the connection between age structure and work, and the third is the link between work and economic output, our productivity. 2. Population change will drive large regional shifts in economic activity. A decline in the shares of global economic activity in East and Southeast Asia, Europe, and North America, and an increase in the shares of Central and South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Economic shifts should be greater than population shifts. Countries belonging to the same UN subregion are grouped based on the projected growth of effective labor for the subregions between 2020 and 2060. Group 1 consists of countries belonging to subregions projected to experience decline, East Asia and all of the subregions of Europe. The effective number of workers is projected to decline by 0.45% per year between 2020 and 2060, compared with a growth of 1.15% per year between 1950 and 2020. Group 1's share of global labor is projected to drop from almost half in 1950, to 31.9% in 2020 and to 18.1% in 2060. 3. Prime-age adults are being squeezed by population aging. On average for the world as a whole, per capita consumption is higher for prime-age adults than for children and seniors. In countries with older populations, however, per capita consumption for seniors is higher than per capita consumption for prime-age adults. Moreover, children living in aging countries also appear to gain, in terms of per capita consumption, relative to prime-age adults. Apparently, aging has not led to a generational divide, pitting the old against the young. Aging itself results largely from low fertility, which in turn reflects parental decisions to have fewer children and spend more on each, so perhaps this is not surprising. However, with population aging, consumption by prime-age adults is being squeezed by a shift in resources to both the young and the old. Changes in age structure may boost per capita economic growth in low and lower middle-income countries but inhibit growth in high and upper middle-income countries. Here we are concerned with the direct effect of age structure on economic growth as captured by the growth of the support ratio. Growth of the effective labor force leads to higher standards of living if it exceeds growth in the effective number of consumers. Consumption per equivalent consumer, given age standardized productivity and saving rates, varies in proportion to the ratio of effective workers to effective consumers as measured by the support ratio. Growth in the support ratio, when it occurs, boosts the rate of income growth per consumer and is called the first demographic dividend, Mason and Lee 2007. Eventually, the support ratio begins to decline as a result of population aging, generating a negative first demographic dividend. A second demographic dividend, the term used for the effect of population on the growth of 1s, y, l, may more than offset the negative first dividend as is briefly discussed below. The term demographic dividend is used widely and is defined in different ways by different researchers and organizations, Gribble and Bremner 2012, Lee and Mason 2006. Many studies, including this one, emphasize how changes in age structure influence economic growth, Bloom and Canning 2001, Bloom and Williamson 1998, Mason 2005, Mason and Lee 2007. Other studies emphasize the level of age structure rather than changes, United Nations Population Fund 2012. 5. Population aging, viewed from an economic perspective, is accelerating sharply in high-income and upper-middle-income countries. The economic impact of population aging depends on the costs and contributions of seniors that vary considerably from country to country. Data on the life cycles can incorporate important information about the consumption by children and seniors and the economic value of their labor. Mason et al. 2017. United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, Population Division 2019. 6. Population aging will increase pressure for more private assets and/or more public debt with an uncertain impact on capital. Many economists expect that population aging will raise the ratio of capital to labor, capital deepening, raising the productivity of labor, reducing interest rates, and increasing output. Egertson, Lancaster, and Summers 2019. Lee 2016. Capital deepening is expected because more per capita wealth will be required to fund longer retirements and the population share of wealth holding elderly will rise. Retirement wealth can take two forms, however. One is real or financial assets such as accumulated pension funds, retirement accounts, and equity in a home, business, or farm. Another is transfer wealth, the expected value of net future support from the family or more typically from unfunded public pensions, healthcare, or long-term care that support seniors while relying heavily on taxes paid by prime-age adults. Unlike capital, the transfer of wealth does not raise productivity or output and is an obligation to future generations. A forward-looking measure, called the wealth gap, is used to assess the implications of aging for resource requirements into the future rather than just in any single year. The wealth gap is the wealth that would be required to fund old age needs conditional on a country's existing consumption and labor income profiles. For 2020, the wealth gap varied from 118% of total labor income in lower middle-income countries and 190% in low-income countries to a high of 884% of total labor income in high-income countries, Table 3. Wealth gaps are projected to grow much more rapidly than labor income over the coming decades. Between 2020 and 2060, the wealth gap is projected to increase relative to labor income by 39% in low-income countries, from 190 to 264, around 90% in middle-income countries, from 118 to 220, and by almost 50% in high-income countries, from 884 to 1299. On the assumption that the age profiles of consumption and labor income are maintained in the future, the rising wealth gap would lead to a society with large net transfers, public or private, from younger to older generations, large accumulations of public debt burdening future generations, or high rates of saving and capital accumulation. Economies that rely heavily on saving and capital accumulation to fund the wealth gap can expect population aging to raise national income, either from higher labor productivity or from increased asset income from abroad.